Hello, and welcome back to Poetry for Now. This is the fourth lesson in the series for Writers in the Schools. I'm Jennifer Perrine, and in the last lesson, we took a look at the Golden Shovel in a little bit more detail, and you had a chance to write and revise your own Golden Shovel poem. In this lesson, we're going to move on to a new poetic form, one that's even newer than the Golden Shovel, and that form is called the Duplex. But before we get to that, go ahead and make sure that you've got out your worksheet for this lesson. If you don't have access to the worksheet, just grab a piece of paper and a pen or something to write with, and we're gonna get warmed up here with some free writing. So for today's free write, I'd like you to describe a time when you struggled with something, and it could be something that you struggled with in the past but you overcame, or maybe it's something that you're still struggling with right now. And it could be something that is a pretty common experience that many people struggle with. So, struggling with relationships or dealing with the death of a loved one. Or it could be something that's really unique to you. And it doesn't have to be one of those big things like love or death either. It could be a pretty small thing. So whatever it is, describe how it made you feel and write a little bit about the things that you've tried to change the situation, and maybe about other things that other people tried to help the situation. And describe any moments that had to do with the struggle that felt like progress to you, and also moments that maybe felt like setbacks along the way. So go ahead and pause the video now for 5 minutes, and then press play when you're done writing, and I'll see you in a few minutes. Welcome back. Thanks for doing some writing. We're going to dive into listening to a duplex. So the duplex was invented by Jericho Brown, and so we're going to start with listening to him read one of those poems.
Duplex. I begin with love, hoping to end there. I don't want to leave a messy corpse. I don't want to leave a messy corpse full of medicines that turn in the sun. Some of my medicines turn in the sun. Some of us don't need hell to be good. Those who need most need hell to be good. What are the symptoms of your sickness? Here is one symptom of my sickness. Men who love me are men who miss me. Men who leave me are men who miss me in the dream where I am an island. In the dream where I am an island, I grow green with hope. I'd like to end there.
So that was a poem, The Duplex by Jericho Brown. And he's written several different ones of these. So if you weren't able to hear the audio for any reason of him reading, you can also read it here or in your worksheet. So I'm going to show you just a little bit about Jericho. So he is the author of 3 books of poetry. His most recent book is The Tradition, which includes all of these different examples of the duplex form. And just a couple of weeks ago, that book won the 2020 Pulitzer Prize for Poetry. So it's getting all the recognition that it deserves. And just as kind of I think a fun fact about his background. So he was born in and grew up in Louisiana, and he worked as a speechwriter for the mayor of New Orleans for some time before kind of embarking on the literary career that he's on now and becoming a professor at Emory University in Georgia. So why the duplex? Why did he choose that as the name for this poetic form? He talks in an interview about how he decided to call the form the duplex because there's something about all that repetition in the poem and also the couplets. So if you remember from the Golden Shovel that Terence Hayes wrote, that was in a couplet form where each stanza has 2 lines in it. So there's something about that, those couplets, the two-ness of the poetic form, as well as its repetition, that made Jericho Brown feel like it was a house with 2 addresses. So if you haven't seen a duplex before, It might look something like this, where there's a house over here or a home over here and another home over here, and they're all part of the same building, but they're kind of in two separate pieces. And so Jericho Brown said that he was thinking about this in relationship to the different identities that each individual might own, or hold. So for him, as a queer African-American man, putting all of those different identities into the same house, as it were, he was thinking about that for poetic form as well. How can you incorporate all of these different aspects or things that seem to kind of fit together, but don't always fully fit easily into the same poem? So he uses a particular metaphor there where he says, I wanted to highlight the trouble of a wall between us who live within a single structure. What happens when that wall is up, and what happens when we tear it down? How will we live together? Will we kill each other? Can we be more careful? So this idea of the wall as this center line that divides it, even as it makes it all part of the same structure. So what goes into a duplex? So according to Jericho Brown, he says it should be 14 lines and should be 7 couplets, so 7 of those pairs in stanzas. And each line, for him, he says it should be about 9 to 11 syllables in each line. So that, for him, helps to keep it kind of a similar length, and also echoes a sonnet, which sonnets use lengths that are traditionally about that long. And the next big piece is that the second line of each couplet should change our impression of the first line in an unexpected way. So I'll go back and revisit his poem in a second to show you some of the places where that happens. He also says the second line of each couplet should be echoed then in the first line of the following couplet. And then finally, the last line of the poem echoes the very first line of the poem. So if we go back and take a look at his poem here, so he says, for each couplet, the second line should kind of take us in an unexpected direction. So in this poem, it starts with, I begin with love, hoping to end there. So it starts with this image of love and staying there. And then the next line totally moves us in a different direction, saying, I don't want to leave a messy corpse. So it goes right from this, maybe we imagine love and beauty and great, wonderful feelings, and then the image of a messy corpse right in the next line. So it just really upends our expectations. So that's one element. And he says that each couplet should do that, where the first line kind of leads you in one direction, and then the second line of the couplet just kind of takes you in a different direction. The next piece that he talks about is that in between each couplet, the second line of one should then become the first line of the next, with maybe some variations in there. So in this one, it's pretty much exact from the I don't want to leave a messy corpse gets repeated almost word for word, or exactly word for word. But here, full of medicines that turn in the sun gets changed just a little bit. So it's some of my medicines turn in the sun. So a little bit of variation, but still you can definitely hear the echo there. And then the very last thing that he says is that the last line of the poem should echo the first line. So the last line here, I grow green with hope, I'd like to end there, echoes the first line. I begin with love, hoping to end there. So that's got more of a variation, but you can still see the repetition there and hear it. So along with all of that repetition and the couplets, things that kind of echo some of the things that we talked about when we talked about the golden shovel, part of what's happening when there's this repetition and the changing of expectations that comes up from one line to the next, it's also using a specific technique that's derived from the blues form. So the blues form, it's actually one of the most popular forms of American poetry, but it often occurs less in written poetry and more in African-American oral poetry, traditional oral poetry, or in the musical tradition of the blues as a song. So the blues poem, it takes on a particular form that's used in that song and in that oral tradition. And that form is, there's a statement made in one line, so we'll call that line A, And then there's a second line that's a variation on that first statement. So it's A with this little kind of mark. So it's similar, but not exactly the same. And then there's this third line where there's an ironic alternative that's declared. So it's something that upends those expectations. So in the duplex, Jericho Brown is incorporating these different elements of the blues form, but he's not making it these 3-line stanzas that get repeated over and over. He's kind of moving those different things throughout the poem. So he's including those ironic alternatives, those unexpected moments. He's also including those A and A with a little prime mark there. So it's places where it's varying up something that's already been stated. So if we go back and look at his duplex, you can see it here. So again, I don't want to leave a messy corpse full of medicines that turn in the sun. So this would be an example of that upending those expectations, moving from this line into this one, and then this into this one would be this could be considered line A, and this would be considered A with the mark where it changes a little bit, and this would be the B line where something totally unexpected comes back again. So that pattern just keeps repeating throughout the poem, where it's make a statement with a little bit of variation, make a statement that really creates a new expectation in the poem or changes the expectation in some way, and then it just keeps flowing and repeating. So we won't quite dive into writing your own duplex yet, but I do want to give you a chance to try out this blues form. So this is what we'll do for the next 10 minutes. Write a poem that uses that pattern where it states one thing in one line. In the next line, it changes it up just a little bit somehow. And then in the third line, it really upends the expectation. It introduces a totally different way of thinking about something. And if you can, incorporate some rhyme or some alliteration at least once in each stanza. So you can create as many of these patterns that uses the A prime, B as you can in 10 minutes. And then wherever you end up after 10 minutes, you can come back and I'll see you then. Okay, welcome back and thank you for writing. So I wanted to introduce you to another duplex by Jericho Brown. He's got several in his book, and this is the very last one in the book where he combines several different ones together, and I'll show you what I mean in a moment. But first, let's just talk about this duplex cento. My last love drove a burgundy car, color of a rash, a symptom of sickness. We were the symptoms, the road our sickness. None of our fights ended where they began. None of the beaten end where they begin. Any man in love can cause a messy corpse, but I didn't want to leave a messy corpse, obliterated in some lilied field, stench obliterating lilies of the field, the murderer, young and unreasonable. He was so young, so unreasonable, steadfast and awful, tall as my father. Steadfast and awful, my tall father was my first love. He drove a burgundy car. So when Jericho Brown talks about how he came up with this new form, he said, he had been thinking about wanting to create something that could achieve the kinds of things that the duplex does. And as he was experimenting with trying to figure out how to make that happen, he said, I printed every line I'd ever written. So it was something like maybe 10 years worth of poetry that he'd written. He printed all of those poems out and he cut them up until he had just little slivers of lines. And then he put them all on the different floors and surfaces of his house and just started rearranging them. And he said that the earliest drafts of the duplex were composed of these couplets that were formed simply because the juxtaposition of two different lines, maybe a line written in 2007, another one written in 2013, putting them next to each other physically helped him to see a new possibility for ways of thinking about things. So in this particular poem, the Duplex cento, he's using another poetic form called the cento, which is from the Latin word for patchwork. So it's sort of stitching all these different pieces of different poems together. And it's sometimes also known as a collage poem. And traditionally, that's a poem that's composed entirely of lines from poems by other poets. But what Jericho Brown does is he takes that same form and applies it to his own poetry, so stitching together all these pieces from his own poems to make a new one. So in this particular Duplex cento, if you're reading the book, you'll see multiple duplexes in the book, and then in the end, he takes a line from each one and stitches them all together. So this line about the messy corpse that gets repeated here, still using that same duplex form, you can see that it's borrowed from the other poem that we talked about earlier and that you heard Jericho Brown read. So now that you've had a chance to see the duplex a couple of times and also to see a cento, if you have time, I have a bonus writing exercise for you, which is to go back through your free writing and your poems. They can either be from this lesson or from any other lesson, or just poems or writing you've done on your own, and start cutting them up. So find lines that are maybe in that 9 to 11 syllable range, and you can cut them out, or you can just write them on separate scraps of paper, and then just start spreading them all out and rearranging them, looking for those juxtapositions that surprise you. And you'll create a cento of your own by either taping them or gluing them together, or rewriting the lines so that they're just all one poem, but they should all be borrowing from different things that you've written. So if you have time for the bonus writing, go ahead and pause the video for 15 minutes and then press play when you're done. All right, thank you for writing today. The next lesson, we'll just dive right into writing your own duplex and to revising that. In the meantime, don't forget that the deadline for the Writers in the Schools anthology is coming up soon on June 15th. So if you're thinking about sending in work for publication, just go ahead and do it. Everything that you submit will either show up in the print anthology or it'll be in a digital chapbook. And that will make you an officially published writer if you aren't already. And it also looks great on a college application. So it's a great chance for you to share this wonderful work that you've made with other people, and it's really easy to submit. So if you're interested, the submission form link is in the video description. And I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson and to sharing more about how to write your own duplex.